start recording. Hopefully you got that. And I'm just going to ground us super fast in a little bit about why we're here before I turn the mic over to my colleague Sam and Whitney and our friends from Illinois. But firstly, why is it so important to be here together? Why do we believe in the power of faith in spiritual communities? It's because we believe that we have real power to make change. And whether or not you identify as a person of faith or spirituality, we recognize that this group is culturally powerful, has a strong impact on decision makers. Many faith communities are in community with each other, obviously, though COVID's made it harder. And again, maybe you're not part of a faith community specifically, but maybe you're in a book club or a group of friends. And lastly, all of our religions, spiritualities, and traditions teach us to care for each other and for our common home, which means that there are millions of people who can be moved if we tap into these teachings. So this is just kind of a refresher from our friends from Green Faith about why are people of faith so important on climate? And another thing, just for quick grounding, is to build that movement of people of faith and spirituality. We know how important it is to reach out to our own communities and bring more people into action so we can have more and more of an impact. And this is our community webinar, so for everyone in MNIPL, but we always love to specifically invite you to be a community connector as one way to take action. And a community connector is just a kind of point person between MNIPL and their own community so that they can help support and inspire climate action. And community connectors, it can be a really easy commitment. It could just be getting emails from MNIPL and sharing those opportunities with your faith community, maybe some opportunities you'll hear tonight. Or maybe if your community took a really cool action, you let us know so we can spread the word to other people. So just super quick, if you are interested in committing or recommitting to being a community connector for this year, there's a quick little link that it's just like 2 questions, and we'd love to officially have you on as a community connector. So I'm going to pop that in the chat in just a moment. But first, I just want to show you our agenda. So we did a quick grounding, why people of faith, why is it important to be together? And I'm going to turn it over to Sam to do some big picture context setting on climate and systemic action, including what did we do at the state level and even federal level last year? What's on the docket this year? How we involve equity in our work. And what I'm super excited about, because I love stories, is hearing how Illinois was successful in a really incredible climate bill that they passed last year that I think is a huge inspiration for what we can do in Minnesota. And we'll close with ways to take action, some next steps in this area, and then we'll be out of here by 8. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sam.
Thank you so much, Carissa. Appreciate you kicking us off and excited to talk with all of you about some policy efforts, first at the federal level and then a little bit, and then more at the state level. As Carissa said, my name is Sam Benson. I'm on staff as a policy organizer with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. Most of our talk tonight will focus on state level policy, but we did want to give an update on where things stand at the federal level. So a lot of you know, for the past almost year, our federal legislators have been debating what would be the most comprehensive package of climate legislation ever adopted by the US Congress. We're obviously very excited about this, and MNIPL has been working to support this effort through a variety of ways, including in 2021, last year, almost 500 MNIPL supporters met with their federal representatives or a staffer to support bold climate action. So we've been really pushing, especially the climate action that was included in what's called the Build Back Better Act that has passed the US House, but has not yet passed the US Senate. In Minnesota, we can take some pride. Our Senator Tina Smith has really been a leading voice, especially on the clean energy measures included in the Build Back Better Act. So we're going to be a couple steps that we can take to support this effort. I'll drop a link in the chat in just a moment or I'll do it right now, that folks can use to send a message to their federal elected officials, encouraging them to continue pushing for bold federal climate action that we really desperately need to pass. We're also going to take a moment to do a little screenshot as a group. Carissa has a sign she's going to hold up, and then we'll all show, and if folks want to come on camera, we're going to share this on social media to show our federal elected officials how many people, all the people in Minnesota who really care and support bold federal climate action. So if folks want to maybe give a thumbs up or show, a smile to show the support you have for federal climate action. And then Chris has the little sign that says, "Thank you, senators."
Yeah, I don't know if you can see it, but yeah. Oh, I love all the thumbs up. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Let me just do one more. Okay, perfect. You all look beautiful.
Thanks, Carissa, for helping us with that. And keep an eye out on MNIPL's social media pages. You'll see that shared out with a message encouraging our senators to continue to push for bold federal climate action and that legislation to pass. So we're going to be continuing to push, and we hope that you'll reach out to your senators and representatives, encouraging them to keep up that effort as well. So hopefully in this new year, we'll get that legislation across the finish line. You can move on to the next slide. Most of our focus today will be at the state level, where MNIPL does a lot of our work. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the basics of the state legislature, and then some of the things that we can expect in the coming year in regards to climate legislation. To give just a basic context, Minnesota state legislature, a lot of people probably know this, but it's called the bicameral legislature. Just like our US Congress, we have a House with 134 members and a Senate with 67 members. So every Senate district has 2 House districts. Our Minnesota House is currently controlled by the DFL, or the Democrats, with a slim majority. There's the Republicans and a few other smaller parties that we don't need to get into. But the basics is Democrats have a small majority in the House. In the Senate, Republicans also have a relatively small majority. So you have a split legislature with Republicans controlling 34 seats, Democrats controlling 31, and then 2 independents who used to be Democrats, but now usually vote with Republicans holding 2 seats. Obviously, the governor's mansion is controlled by a Democrat, Governor Tim Walz. So what this basically means is that any legislation that's going to pass and that's going to be signed into law needs bipartisan support. And if it doesn't have bipartisan support, it's not going to become law. So yeah, that gives the context for where things are at. You want to move to the next slide? These are a few of the key figures when we look at the legislature, some of the leadership that's in place. In the House, you have Minority Leader Kurt Daudt, who's a Republican from Greater Minnesota, and then you have 2 suburban legislatures, Ryan Winkler and Melissa Hortman, who are the Majority Leader and Speaker of the House, both Democrats. Those 3 have been in leadership for a while, and in the Senate, we actually have new leadership this coming session. We have Majority Leader Jeremy Miller, who used to be president of the Senate, who represents Winona, and then Melissa Lopez Franson, who's also a suburban Democrat, who I believe is from the Eden Prairie area. They are both new to these roles in the last couple months. The previous Majority Leader and Minority Leader stepped aside for different reasons, and so we now have new leadership in the Senate. I think folks have some optimism that they might be able to work together a little better than the past leadership were, but I think the reality is, I think there's still, in divided government, there's still going to be a lot of negotiating and bartering that goes on, and there's still going to be a big difference of opinions between the 2 parties. I think everyone on this call is probably well aware of, the polarized state of our politics, and that extends to our state legislature as well. You can go on to the next slide. One thing that really is going to shape this legislative session is the upcoming elections. In 2022, all 201 seats were up for election in the Minnesota legislature, including state Senate seats, all the constitutional offices, including the governorship. We have a number of state senators who are running for the governorship and are going to be looking to, probably score some political points, and then a lot of folks who are up for re-election this coming year. We're also in the midst of redistricting with the census data from 2020 now finalized. New maps are being drawn for the state legislature. Those are unlikely. The state legislature is supposed to agree on those maps, but due to the divided legislature, it's unlikely that they'll reach an agreement. So it's in all likelihood going to be the Minnesota courts who come to an agreement, and those are likely to be released. February 15th is the expected date when those will be finalized. So keep an eye out, and that will draw new maps for our US congressional seats and for the state legislature. In redistricting years, that often leads to many retirements due to new races, new seats. Sometimes certain legislatures are drawn in to districts where there's multiple legislatures in the same district, and so folks decide that it's a good time to retire. So expect a lot of retirements. Many legislators have already announced they're retiring, and we expect many more to do so. So when you're going to vote in 2022, especially, the person on your ballot might be someone who's less familiar to you. So it'll be all the more important to do your homework ahead of time before going to vote.
Oh, help, 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 help.
We can go on to the next slide. Now let's get into a little bit looking back in 2021 about where things stand and what passed in the past year. In 2021, one of the big things that MNIPL and some of our allies were focusing on was a bill that would have made Minnesota a leader in clean energy, especially in the Midwest. It would have required Minnesota to have 100% clean electricity generation by the year 2040. This would have brought us in line with a number of other states across the country, and really put us on the path to meeting some of our carbon reduction goals. This bill passed the Minnesota House and has in previous years, and similar bills have in previous years as well. But then what the picture we have on the screen is the vote count in the Minnesota Senate. This bill failed 31 to 36. All Minnesota DFL senators voted yes, whereas the 34 Republican senators and the 2 independent senators voted no. Obviously, this is disappointing. We were really hoping that this bill could pass the House, pass the Senate, and get to the governor's desk. So to have it blocked by the Senate was a disappointment, if not terribly surprising. I think it's also important to remember that this is occurring in the context of a climate emergency. Minnesota is experiencing increasing effects of climate change that we're all seeing. We had tornadoes in December this year, wildfires in the Boundary Waters, record high temperatures. And at the same time, Minnesota is failing to meet even its modest carbon reduction goals that were set in 2007. So the state legislature is not passing the legislation we need. And at the same time, we're falling short of the goals that we've set and experiencing the worst effects of climate change. We can go on to the next slide with some brighter news. There were some positives in 2021. Some small legislation did pass. I would describe this as legislation that's necessary and steps in the right direction, but does not meet the moment in terms of the action we need to address the effects of climate change. One positive was what's called the ECO Act. This expanded the state's energy efficiency programs, especially for low-income households. So it should be positive. We're excited to see that implemented. MNIPL also worked hard to make sure we defended against attempted repeals of the clean cars regulations. These were regulations that were put forth through the rulemaking process, so not through the legislature, by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. But then efforts were underway in the legislature to strip Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's authority to regulate auto emissions and prevent them from implementing this rule that expanded access to electric vehicles and helped make sure that our cars are putting less pollution into the atmosphere. So MNIPL made sure that we defended the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's authority to regulate auto emissions. We had folks testify at the legislature over the past few years in support of clean cars, and we had many of our members contact their legislators about this issue. At the end of the day, we are happy to see that clean cars was protected and that rule is now moving forward and being implemented. We're also excited after a number of years to see that funding for solar on schools was secured. $16 million in funding for solar projects that school districts throughout the state can use to put solar on their rooftop or on their other school facility. And grants for that will be starting to be granted in the coming year. So we're excited to see that funding finally move forward. Then there was a few smaller things. There's funding for green workforce development in North Minneapolis, and an extension of Excel's solar rewards program, which helps fund solar projects in our state. There are a number of other things that passed that were good as well. And if folks have things that I might have missed, feel free to drop those in the chat. But those are a few of the ones that I wanted to highlight. When we look ahead to 2022, there are a number of things to be keeping an eye out. One thing for context is Minnesota passes its budget in 2-year cycles. And so Minnesota only has to fund its state agencies every 2 years. What that means is last year, in 2021, Minnesota had to reach budget agreements. So they went to a special session to pass budget agreements, funding our state agencies or public schools or our roads and our state agencies. And if they hadn't done that, we would have risked a government shutdown. Fortunately, they came to an agreement and that passed. And that carries us through until 2023. What that means is in non-budget years, technically the legislature doesn't have to pass anything. And so they don't need to reach a budget agreement in order to keep the lights on for our state. However, usually in non-budget years, the focus is on what's called bonding and then smaller policy items. As some folks might know, bonding is how the state funds larger construction projects, such as large roads, bridges, updates to state-owned buildings, especially for our state colleges and universities. These are projects that have a lifespan of 20 years or more. It's been interpreted that solar panels, for example, don't qualify because they're not permanent installations. And this funding is gotten through borrowing. So the state takes out loans and then pays it back through state bonds over time. And so traditionally, state has passed bonding bills every 2 years. What's interesting about bonding is unlike other legislation, it requires a supermajority, I believe about 80% of legislators to vote for it in order for it to pass. So it's not just a simple majority, it requires a supermajority. So bonding bills are harder to pass and require a larger majority. There's also this year, what makes this year unique is there's a lot of federal funds available based off COVID relief bills, such as the American Recovery Act and others that will make federal funds available that in other years likely are not available. So the legislature will have some discretion over how those funds are spent. Then there's also about a $7.7 billion state budget surplus that can be spent. And there are already ideas floated around on both sides of the aisle on how that should be spent. So the state has brought in a lot of money through tax revenue due to a strong economy, and that gives the opportunity to spend some of that, even though this is not a budget year. You can go on to the next slide. MNIPL has mapped out a number of policy priorities for the coming year, including working to use the state budget surplus to invest in clean energy, energy efficiency, clean transportation, and climate resilience. Some of our legislative allies have already come up with some great ideas and exciting proposals on what are some of those areas where that spending can be, where that budget surplus can be put to good use. And we're excited to support that effort and advocate in support of using that budget surplus to fund those items that we listed. We also see opportunities to improve the state's community solar program. MNIPL has been a strong supporter of community solar across the state, and we believe there are ways that that program can be improved so it meets its mission and can be available to more Minnesotans. There's also a bill that's referred to as the cumulative impacts legislation that would improve the state's environmental permitting process to take into account the cumulative impacts of polluting industries that are already located in areas. So when a new project is proposed, the environmental permitting process considers the polluting industries that already exist in that area. So we've been supportive of some of our colleagues at organizations like COPAL, who have really led that work, and we are excited to continue to back those efforts in 2022. There's also likely going to be efforts to be holding polluters accountable, especially around what we really view as state agency failure around the Line 3 oil pipeline. Agencies like the DNR and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency not taking the steps necessary to prevent aquifer spills and aquifer breaches and other forms of pollution during the construction of the Line 3 oil pipeline. So we're not 100% sure what form that accountability will take place, maybe public hearings, maybe some legislation that's introduced. We are going to be supporting those efforts since we clearly saw failures that occurred during the construction process around Line 3 and the opportunity for improvement of how our state agencies operate. We also want to give a brief preview looking ahead to the 2022 election. After the legislative session wraps up, likely in the end of May, we'll be turning a lot of our attention to the upcoming election. In 2020, we were really excited to work with our members to turn out folks to vote. We had over 3,000, we had conversations with over 3,000 voters. We did a lot of efforts on voter education. We provided rides to the polls. You can see on the right a picture what we called our Chalk the Vote effort, helping congregations get outside and share pro-voting messages with people in their community. In 2022, we're going to do much the same, have nonpartisan ways from early summer through November for people to encourage their friends and neighbors to get out and vote. So your faith community is invited to get involved. And we encourage you also this legislative session to be keeping in mind the election as you pay attention to how your legislator votes. So you can vote with climate in mind this election. MNIPL, we're a nonpartisan group, so we're not going to be endorsing candidates or telling you how or who to vote for, but we will be uplifting the importance of voting and making sure people know how to vote so they have the information necessary to get to the polls. Next, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Whitney, who's going to spend a few minutes talking about how we embed equity in our work. So Whitney, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sam, and really excited to be with you all tonight. I think that looking at policy, it's really important that we think about what are ways that we can make it more equitable, and that often requires having a framework before you get started. That means, for example, in federal legislation, for example, on June 20th, 2021, the administration set out that every single policy coming through the administration would come with recommendations around equity, and that was systematized. So an executive order came that way. So when you kind of apply similar things to organizations or congregations, these principles that I have on the screen are largely drawn from a racial equity framework, but you can also apply that to replace like racial group with communities experiencing disparities, and that becomes really applicable. And so what's shown are principles that are drawn from Race Forward's principles for racially equitable policy platforms. So it's focused on fixing systems, not people. So in every example that we've talked about tonight, we talked about there's some kind of system issue that could be identified with Line 3 as maybe public servants who could do a better job of engaging communities and also understanding how to do that in a culturally competent way. That means also that we have to create solutions that are beneficial to all people. And so what was put forward, for example, as a solution in the case of Line 3 was largely to the benefit of a corporation, not to an individual. And then we also know that recommendations need to come from communities who are experiencing those disparities. And that has to come from engaging them, not just from having, kind of public policy processes that are really not designed to respect things. So if you take Line 3 as an example, tribal relations are very important as a part of that process. And if you don't know if people have actually gone through that training, understand tribal sovereignty, even for ourselves, right? Like as nonprofit organizations, you have to understand those steps and also be grounded in history to really understand what's appropriate for engagement. How do people express really like self-determination in those processes. Additionally, there has to be a commitment to figuring out how do we find measurable ways to see that we're actually making a difference. I would critique a little bit of Race Forward's language that data and what's measurable has to be tracked and resolved with communities and decided with communities. And then finally, the idea of setting measurable results-based equity goals are rooted in the idea that not everyone is carrying the same impact of policy decisions. So if we go through and have this amazing session and pass a 100% clean car bill, who can afford the cars, for example, are some questions. Who's driving them? Who benefits from those policies? And have we engaged other communities? And so just really quickly before I pass it over to Christina from Faith in Place, I wanted to acknowledge someone who's been an important agitator and advocating for more inclusive policy in Minnesota, which is Clyde Belicort. He passed away today in his home from cancer. But he is someone, if you don't know about him, you should look him up today before you go to sleep. He is responsible for helping to co-found the American Indian movement, which came out of Minneapolis. It is basically a movement for self-determination, and those kinds of policies that he and others were and continue to advocate for talk about some of the things that are ancillary, but so much related to what we mean by environmental health, both in the urban context and in other parts of our state, having housing, addressing programs directed towards Indian youth or Native youth, looking for employment, looking for education, communication. So if you look at what was originally a part of that movement, you can't actually, these are not even talking about resources yet or the common goods. So I think really understanding what are the aims of different communities that we're working with is really important. If you get a chance to look at his book on page 59, there's actually an example of a story of how the Archdiocese of Minneapolis used their influence and interact to support the American Indian movement. So when the mayor would call the father at that time, Father Frank Kenny would point to the interest of the American Indian movement and to elevate Native voices. And actually that through that relationship, that's how Clyde got appointed actually to Urban Affairs Commission for the Catholic Church. So just think of us as not, there's ways you can use your influence as a worshiper, as a leader, as a religious leader to uplift voices who are often not heard. And I just wanted to highlight Clyde, especially since he passed away and had such a big impact, both for Native communities, but for civil rights in Minnesota. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Christina.
All right, very good. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm going to be talking about how Illinois did what we did recently. And all right, are you seeing that? Thumbs up? All right, very good, great. Well, good evening. My name is Christina Crost. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm with Faith in Place, which is the Illinois affiliate of Interfaith Power and Light. We also have a separate action fund. It's a 501c4, so we're able to do some of that partisan stuff, endorsing candidates and things like that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But I'm policy coordinator at Faith in Place. I've been there for 7 years. 7 this March. I'm a mom. I'm a United Methodist Church pastor's spouse. I'm a former educator, and I'm actually the conference vice president of our United Methodist Women organization in our conference, in the Illinois Great Rivers Conference. So I bring this, this kind of experience to the work that I do every day. My email is there too, in case you have questions as we go along. All right, and I'm going to start a timer just to make sure I don't go over. Here we go. There. So Faith in Place's mission, much like Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light's mission, is that we empower Illinois people of all faiths to be leaders in caring for the earth. We educate, connect, and advocate for healthier communities. And we believe strongly that diverse people of all faiths should be leading the environmental movement toward justice, because we believe that people of faith are a powerful force for change, as we've already kind of mentioned here this evening. And so I wanted to, wow, this might be hard to see. I wanted to bring kind of my personal experience to this today, in that, you know, the climate crisis is coming to our communities, whether we like it or not, whether we're ready or not. This is a picture. That little red dot is roughly where my house is. And this is a tornado that came through December 10th, just this past year. An EF2 tornado came about a half a mile from my house. Had it skewed about a half a mile east, it would have hit an elementary school and a very large well, not suburban, but a very large neighborhood. Not cool. Not cool ever, especially not cool in December. And so again, you know, in a very rural place where only about maybe 50 to 60% of the residents even believe that climate change is a thing, this is pretty staggering. I also wanted to show an image here of the oil and gas threat map. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this tool or not, but it's really helpful in figuring out what your threat or what your risk is due to oil and gas extraction in your neighborhood. And so you go to the oil and gas threat map, just kind of Google it, and it'll come right up, and you enter your address, and it will show you roughly where the known oil and gas extraction facilities are near you. So if you can see kind of this little, you know, dot here, this is where I live, and you can see just a whole bunch of you know, oil extraction happening, you know, just in my very rural little spot in East Central Illinois, which is where I live. So about an hour south of the University of Illinois. The thing I wanted to point out here though too, and again, you know, as we talk about building healthier communities, they break out here at the oil and gas threat map how many days of school are lost due to ozone pollution, and how many asthma attacks occur in children. 203 is probably not as high as it could be in other places in the country, but that's 203, you know, kids that live in my community. 145 days of school lost. That's not okay. And so, you know, when we think about what are we fighting for and why are we fighting for it, this is what, for me, hits home every day for me. Because my daughter here on the right has asthma, and has ever since. We've lived all over the state of Illinois. My husband, as I mentioned, is a United Methodist pastor, and so we serve where the bishop asks us to serve. So we've been all over the state, and we've never lived more than 30 miles from a coal ash pond. We've never lived more than about 30 miles from oil and gas extraction, and it's taken its toll on my daughter Madeline. And so I'm raising a little advocate over there as well. So where did Illinois kind of get started? We have to rewind to about 2016 to figure out, you know, how the work of, you know, how we were able to pass the most progressive climate bill, you know, in the country. The work really started in 2016. And the Future Energy Jobs Act, or FEJA, was passed at a veto session with a Republican governor in 2016. Almost surprised us at, you know, the hard work we'd been doing. We didn't really think that it was going to happen, but it did. And so this new law generated, you know, $12 to $15 billion to do more solar all over the state. And it was a really big step. We thought that this would be a really great way to get some jobs up and running, to do some just transition work, you know, to really get the solar industry kicked off in the state of Illinois. And for a lot of different reasons, it didn't quite happen that way. And so the coalition of organizations called the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, of which Faith in Place is part, and you can see you know, some of the logos of some of the organizations that are part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, got together and said, FEJA was a great first step. we need to go bigger. We need to do more. And so you'll see organizations here that might be really small urban community organizations. These might be some, national organizations with state level staff. There's some real grassroots organizations here. There's faith community organizations like Faith in Place. So this was a very broad coalition. You've got some labor groups here as well. Very broad coalition of people that got together to say, let's take this to the next level and keep working. So that's the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And my colleague Katie dropped a link in the chat if you want to learn more about the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. So as we moved into 2017, 2018, 2019, and beyond, we had some goals for the coalition. We wanted to hold our decision makers accountable. We wanted to grow the number of environmental champions in our General Assembly. We wanted to build a grassroots network and platform. And so I'll take each of those points here in just a second and talk about how we actually did that. But these were really the main goals here. And in these pictures here, you can see on the far left here, Pastor Scott Onquay, who is our policy director, was very influential in some of the negotiations that happened with the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So he was in our state capitol quite a bit with this group of legislators and lobbyists to help get that bill across the finish line. Down here, you can see my colleague Katie right up front and center. We delivered 20,000 plus petitions on a banner to the governor to say, hey, the people want this kind of a bill, let's do it. And then a picture here over by the statue of Lincoln in front of the State House is a group of advocates I brought from actually deep southern Illinois. Fascinating. I used to live out there and brought this group of advocates to the Capitol to talk to our representatives who are largely not supportive of such things, but actually listened and did take a meeting with us. And so that was encouraging. So part of what we'll do at Faith in Place then as we go along is, we endorse candidates. We have a policy platform that we're rolling out, and then we will use that policy platform to create a questionnaire that will go out to different candidates, and then we will make some endorsements from that point, on the issues that we care most about, again, that align with our policy platform. And so that's kind of how we, help to grow champions in the General Assembly and to keep our lawmakers accountable. Part of the grassroots network is how we organize at Faith in Place is by establishing green teams and houses of worship all over the state. And so we organize around our 5 program areas, our policy platform, and you can see we do lots of different things. We've had Zoom Lobby Day in the last couple of years, which is a tool that we have. It's always more fun to go in person, but it's absolutely a tool that we have in our toolbox. And these are some other pictures of some of our green teams doing different work, in their contexts around the state of Illinois. So they're the grassroots system. Those are where we build, our power as we do this work. So the thing that made the Clean Energy Jobs Act, Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, so different from the way that we do other legislation is that we took it to the communities. So we held over 100 community dialogues over a series of 2 years, all over the state. All the little green dots are the different places that we held these events. And we asked people what they thought should be part of a clean or climate energy bill. And they told us. And as you might imagine, the answers came different from different places in the state. And so we used that feedback to directly inform our bill language. No other bill has been written this way, certainly not in Illinois. And it's not done like this very often in other places because it's hard. And you really have to listen to the communities about what they want and then, work it out and negotiate it together. So it's not an easy way to write a bill, but we found that it was the best way to have the most equitable bill as that we could have. So there's really 4 pillars to the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which we sometimes call just CEJA. We were going to promote jobs and justice and equity, especially in communities of color. We were going to reach 100% renewable energy. We were going to take 1 million gasoline and diesel powered cars off the road, and we were going to get to a carbon-free power sector with hard decarbonization dates. That was a really hard thing to do. That would also create jobs in the communities that are losing those plants. So those were the 4 pillars of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which was signed into law on September 15th, 2021. Yay, yay, exactly. Jazz hands all over. Exciting day. So when we talk about how do you get the urban-rural divide engaged around this kind of bill, for me, the jobs and economic justice part was really influential in how we did that. We took a map of where the different coal-fired power plants and coal mines were in the state of Illinois. So you take that map and then you say, okay, well, as we close down these plants, these are going to be the communities that are most affected by those closures. And so we need to invest in those communities. Are also the communities that have been harmed most by pollution, right? So we want to put our investment and our time and our attention there. And so we will collect $80 million a year from ratepayers. And 45% of that will go to these EJ and low-income communities. We'll have workforce hubs where we can retrain workers into the clean energy economy. And that could be everything from solar and wind installation to, you know, lots of other ways that you can be involved in the clean energy economy, EV charging stations, you know, energy efficiency, lots of different ways. There'll also be a contractor incubator program that matches up with this training. So you can train people all day, but if they don't have jobs to go to when they're done with the training, you kind of miss the mark. And so we'll also have contractor incubator programs that will have funding available to get some of these contractor businesses off the ground, you know, funding especially for those who have diversity, you know, in their businesses. We also found it very important, especially the faith community, that returning citizens who will be coming out of the justice system and back into their communities would be at the front of the line to get this kind of job retraining too, because these kind of jobs absolutely can change lives. We also committed to being on a path to 100% renewable energy by 2050, and there are some targets by which we do that. It's also going to close down the largest emitter in and polluter in Illinois, which is Prairie State Energy Campus. It's also the 7th largest polluter in the United States. This was the thing that almost derailed the whole thing, getting this plant on a timeline for closure. But a timeline we do have. And then just transition again, you know, as we talk about how we can get communities that are often impacted the most. When we talk about just transition, we need to talk about how do you replace that money that they'll lose when those plants leave their communities. So there's grant funding for that. Community energy and climate planning help made so that these communities can plan ahead for what happens when these plants leave. There's also a displaced energy worker bill of rights within this bill that makes sure that we're not leaving folks behind. And I'm coming up on time here. I wanted to mention too, though, this was something that we heard from people a lot as we, you know, toured the state, talking about, you know, well, what's in it for me? Maybe I don't have a coal plant in my neighborhood, or maybe I don't have a coal mine around. So, you know, why do I care about any of this? Expanding energy efficiency programs helps everybody save money. The greenest energy is the energy we don't have to produce, right? Prohibiting late payment fees, which often impact communities of color and low-income communities, and just gets people in a debt hole that they can't dig out. So nobody should be gouged, you know, just for keeping the lights on and the heat on in their homes. So they've worked on that, which really helps everybody. It also extends energy efficiency goals, especially in cases where you might have a home that wants to do some energy efficiency project. And so the contractor comes in to start doing this project and then finds a big problem, a much bigger problem than maybe what they had the funding to fix in the first place. You know, instead of weather stripping, they figured, you know, they've got a big hole in their roof that they need to fix before they can do anything, you know, with their windows kind of situation. So this puts aside some money to help fix those problems so that the energy efficiency project can go forward. I run into this a lot. in the rural context that I'm in, that folks can't quite even get to energy efficiency because they have a lot bigger problems with their homes sometimes. So that's an exciting part of this bill. So I can answer questions, but that is about what I had to talk about for you today. So I can stop there. Oops.
Probably be easiest if folks have questions, feel free to just throw them in the chat, and then Christina can respond to those.
Turn off my slides. There we go.
Maybe they're
Right.
typing.
Right.
One question I have, you talked a little bit about specifically that one power plant that was a real barrier, but do you want to maybe highlight a few of the other barriers that you had to overcome in this fight that were especially difficult?
Our relationship with labor was difficult. That had a lot to do with the Prairie State Energy Campus situation. You know, there's way more jobs in renewable energy, you know, potential jobs in renewable energy than in, you know, the current energy situations that we have. And so it's very hard to get people to think about a new thing when the sure thing is right in front of them, even though it's very clear to anyone who's paying any kind of attention that coal's on its way out. We need to be stopping gas and we need to transition as quickly as possible, right? And that there are jobs available to do that. That was definitely a stumbling block. Let's see, what other roadblocks did we come up against? Who's going to pay for it is the question I get most often. And it's a great question. I want to know who's going to pay for all of these things. These things sound great. Who's paying for it? The original draft of our bill had the polluters paying for all of these programs through a number of different mechanisms. That got pretty quickly switched as it met with a lot of resistance in the assembly. And so it is being collected by ratepayers now, which again, not our initial thought, but great pain was taken to keep it to a very reasonable level where we're not exceeding like $3 or $4 per ratepayer for these kinds of programs. And so, and there are mechanisms there if people are having a hard time paying for their energy bills already, as we saw, you know, that I talked about, you know, in the consumer benefits, you know, everyone's going to still be able to keep their utilities on, and, you know, the money will be found. Okay, so I'm looking in the chat. Okay, oh wow, there's some really good ones in here. I can't answer how we're going in Minnesota, but let me see which ones I can answer, and then Sam, you can answer how things are going in Minnesota about this. Did you have members in your organization from both political parties who were willing to advocate to their reps? So, you know, as often happens, you get folks who are of a particular political persuasion, maybe personally, and their rep does not really represent their particular interests. My particular rep is one of those people, and my senator. And that was the case in Southern Illinois as well. But like I said, they were willing to listen. They had some questions. They were very misinformed about some things. So we were able to somewhat deliver, you know, some fact sheets and some information that, you know, at least clarified some of their misgivings, of one of which was that the pollution created from the waste from all of these solar panels and wind turbines is far greater than any pollution that we might see from coal and gas. We hear that a lot. And so, you know, being prepared to say, well, no, and being prepared with a few talking points about, you know, look at the opportunity for new industry. If we figure out how to recycle these materials, you know, that's a new job opportunity there in the green economy. But coal and gas are on their way out. How were the state's utilities involved? Good question. There were some issues with them in the past. ComEd, the big utility up in the Chicago area, had some major issues, ethics issues. And so that actually ended the career of our former Speaker of the House and ushered in, some new leadership, which was needed. They were largely locked out of the negotiations for this bill. This bill, when I say that the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition really brought this thing on across the finish line, the utilities were not involved because the governor up front said, no climate, no jobs, no clean energy, no deal. We're making this happen, and we're listening to the people. So the utilities were not involved, which was fascinating because in 2016, that was not how this went. So the coalition that we built in those years was able to flex more power than the utilities. I want to be mindful of time because I want Sam to jump in here too. Let me see if there's anything I can answer quickly. How are we able to set up meetings with folks across the state? Again, we lean into our green team model there, and we find green teams in areas that might be able to work together with other community organizations, and we would host them there. Some of those meetings were not super well attended. Some of those meetings, had 100 people at them. It really just depended. Some of them were held virtually as well. Even before COVID happened, some of these, meetings were held virtually just to kind of gather up support. But, we lean into our green teams there, and we, find areas that we might be able to work with other partner organizations, and we do them that way. I think that might be all I have time to answer right now. Sam, do you want to jump in things?
Yeah, I can hop in. Thank you so much, Christina. We really appreciate Christina and her colleague Katie for joining us for Faith in Place to highlight the really exciting work that they have done. If folks want to do some jazz hands, thumbs up, small clap. And yeah, we hope to really be able to replicate that work in Minnesota. But a number of folks were asking, similar work in Minnesota. Don't have time to go into details, excuse me. But I will say the Minnesota House Climate Action Caucus has really put together a really strong set of legislation, and a lot of that passed out of the Minnesota House this past year in 2021. And the proposals they have are pretty intentional and thought through. I don't know if I could say they're, exactly comparable to what was passed in Illinois, but I would say it's really strong. And the unfortunate truth is the Minnesota Senate really hasn't taken up that legislation, and has passed, like we talked about earlier, maybe small parts of it, but not to the extent that we really need. So I think that's, what we see in Minnesota is, we have the Minnesota House really doing the work and passing some really strong legislation, that legislation not reaching the governor's desk and not becoming law due to the real blockade that we see in the Minnesota Senate. So yeah, I think that's kind of the short summary of where things stand and how it's comparable to Illinois. Krista, if you're willing to share your screen once again, that would be great. And we have a few more slides before we end. My apologies if we just go a couple minutes past 8 o'clock. We did want to map out for you a few things in our coming year as far as policy engagement. Right now, we're right in winter 2022. Our next big item on our agenda, and we'll highlight this on our next slide, is Caucus for Climate. Caucuses are coming up on February 1st. There'll be hopefully in-person and non-in-person ways to engage in that. In the spring, we'll be engaging with both our federal and state legislatures to advocate for climate action on all levels of government. We'll be in touch about when those opportunities arise and ways to engage in that. Then as we transition into summer and fall, we'll be really working with our network to get out the vote for climate leading up to Election Day on November 8th. And hopefully we'll spend 2023 really passing and advocating for bold climate action in our state, similar to what we saw in Illinois. So that's our pathway for the coming year. and look forward to being a part of it with us, with all of you. We have a caucus training coming up, as you can see on the screen, and we'll drop a link in the chat to register on January 18th. That's a week from today at 6:30 p.m. Join us to learn how you can utilize the caucus process to advocate for climate action. At caucuses, you can help shape your party's platform so it follows your values. You can support candidates who match your values. You can meet your neighbors and potentially candidates. And then resolutions are a great chance to educate others about the causes you care about and show support for policies. I dropped the link to register in the chat, so if you are interested, I encourage you to register. And love to see you again in a week. Next slide. A couple of steps you can take. We just talked about caucus training. Love to have you join us. We also have a tool you can use to contact your legislators, excuse me. Chris, if you're able to drop that link in the chat, or I can try grab it as well. We have a link you can use to send a message to your legislator, letting them know that you want them to prioritize climate action this legislative session. You can personalize the message and add your own specifics that you want to highlight. I encourage you all with the legislative session starting, I believe, the last day of this month. It's important that they hear from their constituents that people want them to prioritize climate action, that needs to be a priority this coming year. We'll also be in touch as election day grows closer and into the summer about ways to engage and get out the vote. That's what GOTV stands for with MNIPL. So we'll be excited to do a number of get out the vote efforts, and we'll be excited to partner with all of you on that. Then we'll be continuing to engage both our state and federal legislators on a variety of issues. I also just wanted to make an invitation to everyone on this team. We have a policy team that meets every other Monday at 6:30 to 8 o'clock virtually on Zoom. If you're interested, feel free to send me an email. I'll drop my email right in the chat, sam@mnipl.org. Or check out our website. We have an event page on our website, and you're welcome to reach out to me, and I can send you the information to attend our policy team. Love to have folks join, and we talk about these issues on an ongoing basis and highlight ways that folks can engage in policy advocacy throughout our state. And Katie just dropped Christina and her contact information. So if you have questions about the work we highlighted in Illinois, feel free to reach out to them. But I just want to wrap up by saying thank you all for joining us. It was great to have you, and I hope you walked away with some actionable steps and with a lot more information. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Christina. I'll just let you know I am going to be sending a follow-up email. So if there's any resources, I think I already got your slides, Christina, so I might include those, but I'll be sending that out. Yeah, if there's anything else you want me to include, feel free to pass that along. But yeah, really appreciate you being here, and yeah, thanks again.
Thanks for organizing.
Yeah, and if we can return the favor at any point, feel free to reach out.
Very good. All right.
Have a good night. See you, Whitney.